On June 1st, 2026, just before 5 in the morning, scientists at Hawaii's Volcano Observatory gathered at an overlook called Wekahuna to watch something they'd been anticipating for weeks. 20 minutes after it began, the lava fountain in front of them was already taller than a 100-story building. By the time it peaked an hour later, it had reached 650 feet, a glowing column of molten rock lighting up the pre-dawn sky over Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, visible to visitors watching from the crater rim more than half a mile away. That single eruption episode did something no eruption at this volcano had ever done before. It broke a record that had stood for 40 years. And as of this week, the volcano still hasn't stopped. To understand why this particular eruption matters, you first need to know what it's actually up against. Between 1983 and 1986, a vent on Kilauea called Pu'u produced 47 high fountaining episodes before settling into the long, steady lava flow most people associate with it today. A style of eruption that went on to reshape entire stretches of coastline over the following 3 decades. For 4 decades, that number, 47, stood as the record for the most fountaining episodes ever produced by a single eruption at this volcano. Nothing since had come close. Then, on December 23, 2024, lava began erupting from the Halema Umayu crater at Kilauea's summit, and it simply kept going episode after episode, month after month, through 2025 and well into 2026 until June. First, 2026, when episode 48 pushed the count past Pu'u'o's old total for good. Katie Mulliken, a spokesperson for the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, confirmed what that meant plainly. It was now the most episodes ever recorded for a single eruption at that volcano, full stop, a milestone reached not through one dramatic event, but through the sheer, sustained persistence of dozens of individual episodes stacking up one after another. The eruption doesn't behave like a typical continuous lava flow, and that rhythm is part of what makes it so unusual. Instead of a steady stream, Kilauea has been erupting in discrete, self-contained bursts, each one preceded by the summit slowly inflating as magma pressure builds underground, measurable in advance through subtle changes in ground tilt that instruments around the crater rim track continuously, day and night, then releasing that pressure in a single, intense fountaining episode, lasting anywhere from a few hours to more than half a day before falling quiet again for days or sometimes weeks while the whole cycle resets and the pressure rebuilds. Scientists have now documented 53 of these episodes and counting, an average of roughly one every 11 days since the eruption began, though the actual spacing varies considerably depending on how quickly the summit reinflates each time, sometimes compressing to barely a week between episodes, other times stretching out closer to a month during quieter stretches of the sequence. The fountains themselves have been genuinely dramatic by any measure. Episode 26, back in June of 2025, reached about 1,246 feet, the tallest recorded up to that point in the sequence. A jet of molten rock taller than the Empire State Building shooting straight up out of the crater floor. Episode 40, in January of 2026, reached roughly 800 feet and lasted just under 10 hours, with falling volcanic debris, tephra, drifting as far as the public viewing area and landing in pieces up to 4 inches across, small enough not to pose a serious danger to visitors watching from designated overlooks, but substantial enough that park rangers kept a close eye on wind direction throughout the episode. By the time episode 48 broke the 40-year record in June, fountain heights in the 500 to 650-foot range had become almost routine for this particular eruption, remarkable by any normal volcanic standard, yet no longer the most surprising part of what scientists were actually seeing. That's because episode 48 broke a second record at the same time, one that had nothing to do with the height of the fountain itself. The volcanic plume rising above the eruption reached roughly 24,000 feet above sea level, towering 4,000 feet higher than the previous high point set just 2 episodes earlier, tall enough to rival the cruising altitude of a commercial airliner and trigger real caution for aviation routes passing anywhere near the Big Island. Researchers monitoring the eruption found that detail more scientifically interesting than the fountain height, because a plume that much taller, without a corresponding jump in fountain height, points toward a specific explanation. More gas-rich, volatile-laden magma reaching the surface than in earlier episodes, even while the raw force of the fountaining itself stayed roughly consistent with recent months. More gas, the same fountain. An unusual combination that suggests something about the magma feeding this eruption may be gradually changing beneath the surface, even as the visible eruption pattern on top continues looking, on any given night, much like the episode before it. The eruption has kept going well past that June record, and it's still actively happening as of this week. Episode 50 began on the evening of July the 28th, 2026. fountaining continuously for 7.5 hours before stopping, its fountain peaking near 500 feet and its plume reaching roughly 19,000 feet, covering close to half the crater. Floor in fresh lava that glowed orange well into the following morning as it slowly cooled. Then, on August 12th, less than 3 weeks later, episode 53 began at around 3:45 in the afternoon, fountaining for nearly 10 hours straight from the north vent before finally quieting down in the early hours of August 13th. At its peak, that most recent episode released lava at a rate of roughly 300 cubic yards every single second, a pace intense enough that the U.S. Geological Survey's monitoring instruments needed to actively track the flow rate in real time just to keep up with how quickly the crater floor was changing. Footage from the observatory's webcams showing the molten surface visibly rising and reshaping itself over the course of a single afternoon. As of this writing, Kilauea's summit has already begun reinflating again, and forecasters expect another episode within the coming days, meaning by the time most people watch this, the eruption will likely have already produced at least one more chapter in a sequence that shows no clear sign of stopping. It's worth understanding exactly what has, and hasn't, made this eruption so unusually persistent, because the answer says something genuinely interesting about how volcanoes like Kilauea actually work beneath the surface. Each fountaining episode appears to be releasing pressure from a relatively shallow magma reservoir underneath the summit, venting it in a sudden burst before the connection to deeper magma sources gradually restores that pressure and sets up the next cycle. That kind of episodic, pressure-driven rhythm isn't unique to this eruption specifically. Pu-o-o itself displayed a similar pattern across its own 47 high fountaining episodes decades earlier. But the current eruption has now sustained that rhythm for longer, and through more individual cycles than any eruption scientists have ever documented at this particular volcano, extending a known pattern of behavior well past its previous documented limits. That persistence raises an honest, still open question that scientists studying the eruption haven't fully answered yet. How long can this actually continue? Kilauea's broader eruptive history offers some perspective, though not a firm answer. The volcano's activity stretches back through a documented explosive eruption in 1924, and later through an almost continuous 35-year eruptive period that finally ended in 2018, when lava flows destroyed more than 700 structures around the Leilani Estates neighborhood in Lower Puna. A starkly different, far more destructive style of eruption than what's happening at the summit right now, one that forced thousands of residents to evacuate their homes with little warning as fissures opened directly beneath residential streets. The current episodic fountaining sequence, by contrast, has remained largely contained within Halema-Umau crater itself, spectacular to watch from the designated overlooks scattered around Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, but without the same kind of direct threat to nearby residential communities that defined the 2018 event. That distinction matters enormously for how seriously local authorities are treating each individual episode. The volcano alert level has fluctuated between advisory and watch throughout the sequence, and the park itself has occasionally closed temporarily during especially intense episodes, along with brief closures of nearby Highway 11 when ashfall or air quality concerns warranted it, but nothing in the current pattern has approached the scale of evacuation and destruction seen 8 years ago. Scientists don't currently have a reliable way to predict exactly when this particular sequence will finally end, and it's worth being honest about that uncertainty rather than pretending otherwise. Volcanologists can track the summit's inflation in real time, giving, when the next individual episode is likely to begin, the kind of forecasting that let USGS accurately anticipate episode 53's window well before it actually started. What remains considerably harder to predict is the bigger question, whether the underlying magma supply feeding this eruption is beginning to taper off, setting up an eventual end to the entire sequence, or whether, as the unusually gassy episode 48 plume might suggest, there's still a substantial evolving reservoir of magma continuing to work its way toward the surface, with no clear end in sight yet. So here's where that leaves things, right now, in the middle of an eruption, still actively unfolding. Kilauea has already done something no eruption at this volcano managed across the previous 100 years, of careful, continuous monitoring, sustaining more individual fountaining episodes than any sequence scientists have ever documented there, and adding a taller, gassier plume to that record just months ago, a sign the changing beneath the surface in ways nobody has fully mapped out yet. Think about what it actually takes to keep a scientific record like this one updated in real time. Every one of those 53 episodes required Hawaiian Volcano Observatory staff to monitor seismic activity, ground deformation, and gas emissions around the clock, distinguishing the subtle signs of an approaching episode from the volcano's ordinary background hum, then getting observers safely positioned at overlooks like Wekahuna before each fountain actually broke the surface. That's not a single dramatic discovery announced once and then filed away. It's an ongoing, day-by-day monitoring effort that has now been running continuously for more than a year and a half, and still, as of this week, unable to say with certainty when the sequence will finally end. Whether episode 54 arrives next week or next month, and whether it finally marks the beginning of the end, or simply another routine chapter in an already record-breaking eruption, is a question the mountain itself hasn't answered yet, and one that Hawaii's Volcano Observatory will be watching for. One careful, continuously updated forecast this eruption for the past year and a half looks set to continue exactly as it has. The summit slowly reinflates, pressure builds beneath Halemaumau, and at some point in the coming days or weeks, without a precise, guaranteed date, the ground will crack open again and send lava hundreds of feet into the Hawaiian sky, one more entry in a sequence that has already outlasted the record it was, chasing by a comfortable margin, and that, as of this week, still has no confirmed final chapter.